Thank you, and it's good to see. We are few, but good faces here, and we can have perhaps a more conversation about what is happening on Navet, or what seems to have been happening on Navet for so long, and mainly make this discussion, how can we change it? And I call the presentation Navet on the Couch because I will make an analysis. I'll be analyzing what happened on there, but I will go a bit deeper, like on psychoanalysis, a bit further from Navet itself to discuss a bit what is the problem of drugs in the region. So please feel free to make the questions in Swedish. Karin is with us. I have also a colleague with us who can help us, and I will answer all your questions as the best that I can. So just to make a brief, to put things in context, what has become known by the Navet project started on the end of 2016 when the police came to me requesting for help to analyze and trying to find solutions for the problem of drugs on Navet. In the Medborgareloften of that year, the public urged the police to solve the problem because people felt unsafe, had this feeling of fusion safety when go around the area, even people that only in rare occasions came to the area. So first with the students, first with my students, and after with the funding from Sundsvall Kommun and from the university, we gather a lot of data to try to find out what's going on there. And the ultimate purpose of the Navet project is trying to develop a kind of intervention that could be more effective than the traditional approach that the police has to the drugs problem. And the police not only in Sundsvall or in Sweden, but also in the whole world. You see, I see the traditional approach to the police to the drugs problem as a catch-a-mole game. If you have ever played the game, you know that it's almost impossible to win because you hit one here and another one pop up there, and you hit other there and another one pop up here, and you hit and hit and hit, and are always more popping up somewhere. The same with drug crime. It almost it doesn't matter what the police, the number of confiscations, the number of arrests that the police does. It seems that there are always more and more drug dealers willing to keep drugs running on the streets. So it's like catch-a-mole, almost a game almost impossible to win. So trying to find that solution, trying to find an intervention, can we do? The question is, what can we do that we are more successful than when the police, or where the results that we have in general with the police work. And with that purpose, we think on the drug market as any other markets of goods, or we have to think in drugs markets in general as markets of goods. So on that market, we have suppliers, we have clients, and we have a place where the merchandise is exchanged. In our case, the merchandise are drugs, and the marketplace, it's Navet. And it's very interesting because, as we will see later, these type of markets also obey to laws of supply and demand that we have to have into account when we started to see types of drugs and get solutions and etc. So at the level of suppliers, we can perhaps study, and we have been doing this and analyzing the data, studying what type of drugs and how they are arriving to Sundsvall, thinking that this can perhaps provide some tips, some more tips for the police, but the intervention itself at this level is not very far from what the police is already doing. We can perhaps, and we will, advise in more collaboration between the police in several counties, or even with other authorities like the Televerket, even Europol, etc. But the intervention itself is not very different. However, there are other parts of this market that perhaps that have not been taken into account, and that we shall observe, and that we shall also target for the intervention, starting for the legal setting. And by this, I mean, as we will see later, that there are many supposedly medical prescribed drugs that are arriving to the streets. Now, how? We don't know. And this is a big task that we shall do. We after go through this and we can discuss and see what's going on there. But what if, beyond the work on the police trying to devastating the supply of drugs to the street, what if we can bring those active, heavy users, problematic users, more of them to treatment, and we can improve treatment in a way that make them stay in treatment and achieve what we called a stable cessation, the truly rehabilitation of drug users. And what if we can prevent new incorporations to this market through good programs of drug prevention in schools, and working on that neighborhoods, working hard on that neighborhoods in which is more likely that kids drop out from school at an early ages. Perhaps if we shut down the market at the client's level, working in a bottom-up strategy, perhaps we could take some results. And what if we can change the urban environment, the characteristics of the place market itself in a way that makes more uncomfortable for people to exchange drugs? So from the Navet project, what I believe is that we have to have a multi-component strategy and working in collaboration all together in order to be able to see streets get clean of drugs. So with all these thoughts in mind, we have been gathered a lot of data, and we have gathered from the police, from the Televerket, from the National Forensic Center. We went to the registers and looked at the number of drug-related deaths in the region. We made a questionnaire, a survey to the general population in which we inquire for victimization, for trust on law enforcement and the justice system, and fear of crime. We went to all schools, to kids of 16, 17, 18 years old, to ask them what drugs did you use in the past 12 months and have you used in your life, and where in the city did you buy. We made an ethnographic observation that implied to be seated in place, observing those people who use drugs, those who buy, those who sell, people in Navet that are absolutely have nothing to say, are not related with the drugs, and see how all these people interact in the Navet area. We made interviews to key informants, to social workers, to bus drivers. We made interviews to people from Greece. Some of them had been dealers in the past. We went to Slinkin and have been interviewing the active users. We interviewed people in treatment in the LARO program. We interviewed parents because we consider that they are hidden victims of the problem of drug abuse in our society. And finally, we have been looking at that urban characteristics that might be facilitating that the drug market exists on Navet. So as you can imagine, with all this data, it will take me several hours to explain all the results. What I bring here to you is just a small piece of the results, and I hope that someday I will be able to write the Navet report, that it will still take me some time, but on the Navet report that hopefully will come will be finished next year, you will be able to see all the results, all the descriptive results of this data. So, starting with some of the results, and this is to look at the crime in the district center. Okay, so if you see Navet is here, we are in this moment here in Kulturmagasinet. This is the crime, this is police data. So this is the crime reported in the district center in 2016. One very interesting thing that if you look at immediately see is that it seems that crime just occurs around this area. Well, this is what crime report, and this is what is reflecting is the work of the police. Most likely because the police are pressured by the public to work more in this area, although perhaps you have also seen some drug trafficking running in some parks and some other streets of the district center. But what is crime reporting, what the police have in their databases is that you see is this picture that you see here, and it's Navet and it's the Toriet and the surrounding areas. Now, these are the places where crime is committed. But if we take a closer look, and if we look at the number of crimes occurring in each one of these places, the picture is like this. And the crime occurs, or the most crime occurs, even in a small area than that big picture that we saw before. So this small area includes mainly the surrounding of the vent hall, Högatan, this corner of Fika that I'm going to ask you to keep it in mind because we will talk about it later, where we have also an important amount of crime, and the Sturgatan in front of the Toriet. Lot of crime occurring here. Now, I wanted to bring to you more nice and less scary picture and that is in the period of 11 years between 2006 and 2016, crime has been decreasing, is a downslope in the district center, and is consistent. So what we see is that crime is coming each year, seems to decrease a bit more. And I have not the data from 2017 and 2018, but Joseph Wiklund, the chief of the police for Medelpad, had told me that this trend continues down. So we have less crime even in 2018. This is district center. So this is this district center only. And crime is decreasing. It seems that decreases in almost all kind of type of crime, except drug-related crime, except this line, red line here, that if there is a trend down here, it's much less pronounced than, for example, theft crime. And this is very interesting because it's related with what I already told at the beginning, and it's like police intervention doesn't seem to have an effect on drug-related crime, and we'll see a bit about it later. Now, one very interesting thing is that it seems that, again, in the district center only, crime occurs almost exclusively during the day. Here you have a circumference that is a 24-hour clock. If you think it has a 24-hour clock, the circumference, this line, this yellow line, cuts the circumference between 9 o'clock in the night and 9 o'clock in the morning. And during 2016, what we see is that crime in the district center occur almost exclusively between 10 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the afternoon, with a peak that goes between noon and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So, very interesting aspects that jointly with this result, and that is this 111 acts of violence against persons, none of them included the use of weapons. So although Sundsvall, and this is one of the first conclusions that we see of the data, although Sundsvall also have what we researchers used to call a street-based drug scene, it doesn't seem to have the dangerousness of drug scenes like Malmö, Stockholm, Göteborg. Even Gävle and Örebro have drug scenes more violent than we have in Sundsvall. As I used to say, we live in part of paradise, although we have it. But let's put a bit Sundsvall in the map. This is data from the Tullverket, and when we look at this, what we see, this is the number of seizures done by the Tullverket. And what you see is that although in these 6 years between 2010 and 2015, some confiscations, some seizures have been done in Västernorrland, is very far from what has been happening in the big cities or the regions of the big cities like Göteborg, Malmö and Stockholm and their airports. It seems that some amounts of drugs also comes from the north frontier, perhaps in a route that comes from the Balkanic countries through Russia. Some drugs comes entrance through here, but Västernorrland, Sundsvall doesn't seem to be an open door for drugs to come in. It's perhaps the corridor between the north and the south, but not an entrance door, which is quite interesting. And this is the good things to live in a place where no one wants to come. If you agree with me, we don't have teachers, we don't have nurses, we don't have pathologists, we don't have dentists, but we don't have either drug dealers, these big drug dealers that are willing to manage these big amounts of drugs. We have a very different type of market that we will see in the next pictures. So, looking at specifically in the Sundsvall municipality, what we see, as we saw in the district center, is that the drug-related crime is more or less stable over the time. Now, one interesting thing too is that in Sundsvall, drug-related crime, it's mainly about the use of drugs. Almost 50% of the crimes that occurs because of drugs here is because the persons use drugs, which is very in line with that red line that we saw before in the district center, because what this means is that this is a problem of addiction, and addiction clearly is a problem that cannot be solved by police intervention. We need to find another ways to fight against addiction, but for sure, making arrests of these people will not solve the problem. They will continue on there independent of what the police does, because the problem is addiction. We have also almost 25% more or less stable of drugs possession. But when we count on the amounts of drugs that the people, when they are arrested and they get to the police headquarters and they weight the amounts of drugs and look at the amounts of drugs in general, are very small amounts of cannabis, mainly cannabis, and pills. Which, again, now comes 3 slides that I'm going to request your carefully attention, because I think that are most interesting for us and that we can debate here, because I bring it exactly for debate. Just, I'm sorry, my throat. You see, when we think on drugs, and I have been researching on drugs for a long time, since in 2000s in these big cities, and when we think on drugs, we immediately think on these big Swedish cities, or perhaps even in countries abroad, and we start to think immediately in heroin, fentanyl. If you see the news and what happens in America and all the epidemic of the fentanyl and people dying, Or we can think on cocaine, for example, big problem in Spain and the United Kingdom, or even in amphetamines and methamphetamines in countries closer to us, as is the Netherlands, Denmark, etc. And all the big cities of Stockholm, Göteborg, Malmö, even Örebro, Gävle, has this type of drugs. I'm sorry, but my throat sometimes. But I got completely baffled when I analyzed the data from the National Forensic Center, that is the authority in Sweden responsible to analyze all the substances that the police confiscated. So they sent this data to me, and what came immediately is that the biggest amount, our problem in Västernorrland, it's not heroin, it's not fentanyl, it's not cocaine, it's not methamphetamines. Our problem is drugs that are supposedly medical prescribed. Problem is pills. And the rank of type of pills, it's amazing. We have anxiolytics, antipsychotics, antiparkinsonians, barbiturics, all types of different types of opioid painkillers, tramadol, methadone. This is the problem in Sundsvall. The rest of the drugs are a very small part in this, and of course cannabis. The rest of the drugs are a very small part of what we find on there. Now, thinking that drug markets obey laws of supply and demand, of course, if this is what have in the streets, problematic, because this is what our kids are buying. This is what our adolescents in schools tell us that they buy. So when we went to schools and asked to all those kids that had reported, almost 90% of the kids that had reported that they had took drugs in the previous 12 months, and we asked them, what type of illegal drug did you take? These non-prescribed medical drugs, these pharmaceutical drugs, comes in second place after cannabis. Because it's that war in the streets, and is that what they are buying. But most crazy even is that they are taking these drugs with higher frequency that they take cannabis. And it's a bit scary if we think on this. So perhaps you make the same question in this moment in your heads that I had in my head, immediately came to me when I saw these things. Where does these drugs come from? So this question, we made it to ex-convicts, to people from Greece, that some of them have been dealt with drugs in the past or have a history of drug dealing. And we ask it also to active users, so the people who are buying in this moment in the streets. Where do you think that these drugs come from? And all of them are consistent, are agreeing in saying, look, part of these drugs, and they are very clear, part of these drugs comes with cannabis, comes in the same routes, the same illegal routes that cannabis comes, many from France and from other European countries. But all of them, attention, all of them are consistent in saying, part of these drugs are leaked locally for the market. Now, we don't know if from people who is in medical treatment, if from people who steal from people who is in medical treatment, if professionals from the health and the social setting, we don't know. But what is clear is that this type of drugs are arriving to the streets. Now, in trying to figure it out, I look at the data from the Socialstyrelsen about all the electronic prescriptions to the population of many different types of drugs. And I bring here to you only the anxiolytics and the opioid painkillers, but is the same. Thank you. Really, sometimes I have these problems with the throat. Happens the same when it goes to hypnotics, to drugs for attention deficit, hyperactivity with attention deficit disorder, so with many other types of drugs. Look here, for example, in the amounts of these medical prescription, electronic prescriptions to the population from anxiolytics. And what to say of people after 45 years old? And what to say about painkillers? Painkillers, opioids. Okay? So, for example, let's say, just to make an example of reading this type of data that sometimes it's difficult. For example, this 447, it implies that for each 1,000 inhabitants in Western this data is from Western for each 1,000 inhabitants in Western it had been issued 447 electronic prescriptions of opioid painkillers. It's amazing and scary. Now, or we have a very sick population, that I think we don't have, or we have an over-medicated population with clear implications for prevention. How are we going to tell to our kids to not take the same drugs that they see their parents and their grandparents take at home every night? They don't have perception of risk. If it's a medical doctor who prescribes these drugs, they don't have any perception of risk. Another reflection that I would like to make jointly with you is, do we really need a pill for every moment of unhappiness and discomfort that we feel in our lives? And if we decide that we have not come to this life to suffer, normal thinking, what authority do we have to say to others, and by this I mean the active users in the street, the drug users, do not use the drugs? After all, they are self-medicating, aren't they? Well, this is something, just a reflection that I would like very much to discuss with you if you are interested in this now on the debate after I finish. But starting with, so let's put it in a part of our head, and let's start with other part of the results that I brought to you also for discussion, because it's something that I think it's very good to discuss with you, because perhaps you have an experience and different of mine on the research that we have been doing in Navet. And there is a very famous criminologist, Ray Jeffrey, that in the 70s came with the idea that crime results partially from the opportunities that the physical environment offers. Moreover, we can change the physical environment in a way that make that opportunities less likely. So behind this idea, there are some theoretical some theories that we're going just let for the boring academics. Let's go to things more practice. Here I have students of criminology with me. That will be interesting. But let's go to the practicalities of these theories. So when we look at this approach that we called crime prevention through environmental design, there are 6 principles that are of maximum importance, namely surveillance, access control, target hardening, territoriality, activity support, and maintenance. And we have been looking at Navet through these 6 principles. I bring it here to you. Surveillance. Surveillance would imply that beyond or besides the work done by the private guards on there, that there is 2 private guards more or less on during the day on there, and that we call that formal surveillance. Besides that formal surveillance, we all, the public, should be looking on there in what we called informal surveillance. For sure, drug users don't like at all, those who buy and those who sell don't like at all that people stare at them. But instead what we do, we blind the windows as much as we can. We blind the windows because we don't want to see, we don't want to look at, we don't want to feel responsible for it. And that, if you remember, that corner of Ika that I ask you to keep in your mind, what we put on there? Plants. I would ask you, how many times do you buy plants when you go to the supermarket? So what happened here, that is desert almost all the time. So there is no one capable of making data surveillance. What are the messages that the drug dealers are taking with this? Do whatever you want to do, that we don't look, more or less this. So perhaps we as citizens have to change our attitude, and this is a change in minds. We have to change our attitude and take the responsibility, share the responsibility with authorities in trying to keep drugs out of the streets. Now, I know that it's easy to tell, it's hard to do. But perhaps we can think all together, and I would like to have more people here exactly to discuss how could we do this. About the access control, of course, Navet is a public space. We don't want to lock it up. We don't want to create private spaces on Navet. But there are ways of redesigning the area, of dividing the space in order to make people to get more exposed. And if we are more exposed, the legitimate user, the person that goes on there to take the bus, will feel more safety. And in the opposite, those who are illegitimate users will feel more uncomfortable, because if there are something that the drug dealers, the ones who buy, the ones who sell, don't want at all, is to be exposed. Now about target hardening. This what means is, how can we make it more difficult for the drug users to exchange drugs? And in this moment, the most important element dificulting the drug dealing is the harsh winter. Because when we go with the jacket and the gloves, for them it's difficult to exchange the drugs and the money with the shake hands or hidden in the newspapers, makes it difficult at most. So what they do, they go inside the vent hole or inside the buses. Now, if we are able to make this informal surveillance and stare on them, and if we are able to make that be more exposed, and if we rebuild the venting hall in a way that there is not parts that they can hide on there, that will difficult the drug dealing. About territoriality, if I ask you, who do you think that owns Navet? The bus takers? Well, from my observation, when I used to be seated here, making the observations of people that come and go and all that. And from my observations, that are days in the week and hours in the day. For example, I put you example, Saturday, between noon and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This area here and the corridor of buses for Timmeroa, I can tell you that the persons who are there waiting for the buses are very in a very thin queue, that they don't dare move from one side to the other, because they feel really stressed and uncomfortable. Even there are people that waits for the bus in the front of the street, and they just only comes to the other part when the bus comes. So, and for example, the vent hall at the Saturday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, no one dares to go inside. That is not part of the group. So this must be reverted. It's not us, it's the drug dealers that must be feeling that they are in enemy land, because now it's the bus taker that thinks that are in enemy land. And this should be reverted in some way. We should be able to push them away and to say, this is our space. That's what territoriality is about. Activity support, very important. I know that the winter, and these photos were taken now, I took it on the past winter, but on this winter we have more or less the same photos. And makes it difficult for moms and their kids to be here and to have a lot of people, well, that are not related at all with the drug use. But Swedes are very innovative, and I think that we can in some way change the place in a way that puts the winter playing for us and not for the drug dealing. I liked very much to see this year the skating rink in the Torget. And this is the type of activities exactly that brings people and pushes away the dealers, the drug dealers. And what to say the Systembolaget? Activity support for who? I would advise clear that the Systembolaget should move away. And I also like that glass of wine on Fridays at 6 o'clock when I arrive to my house and I say, okay, the day is over, the week is over, just let me take that glass of wine. But I will go wherever to buy the wine, but I don't think that Systembolaget should be on there. I would advise against. And maintenance, well, this is something that we should really take a careful care for the maintenance. There is a famous theory in criminology that says that, well, places or that urban spaces where it's visible the antisocial behavior, signs of antisocial behavior of crime, of disorder, civil disorder, they encourage further crime and further civil disorder. So I understand that the hub, it's very difficult to maintain it clean because it's a lot of people every day coming and go. But it's something that we should perhaps make an effort in making it a bit more cleaner. And well, finally, I don't know if we have. We almost don't have time. We are out of time. You will see. This is a proposal, and these ideas is not exact. It doesn't mean that exactly the Navet should be rebuilt like this. It's some ideas to rebuild the place, accomplishing with the principles of crime prevention through environmental design. We will open the debate. I would like now to discuss with you and to at least to know what do you think. And you will have this available in the report that will be also public available, so you will be able to read it. And just to say thank you, a Stur talk. And,